Do you have any questions? Yes, for our friends online, if you cannot watch the video in full screen, try a different web browser. I've been told Chrome works fine. Apparently, sometimes Safari works, sometimes it doesn't. Same thing with Firefox. Any questions here? Yes? No?
Francis, it seems like consciousness is inextricably linked to mental activity and sensual input. Is it necessary to break that linkage, or can they coexist?
The only way to break that linkage with the body-mind is for the body-mind to disappear. The way to break that linkage permanently. The body-mind is an appearance within consciousness. In other words, the body-mind is dependent upon its reality, consciousness, for its very appearance and existence. There is no need to break this linkage, but we have to be open to the possibility that the order of reality that is believed to be the case in our culture, according to which matter is more real than thought and thought is more real than consciousness, is not the real hierarchy of things. Just as on the side of the universe, on the side of the physical and material world, matter, that which appears, that which is perceived, is not the physical reality that creates it. In the same way, within the thoughts, the perceptions, the mind stuff, if you will, is not the reality that creates it. Just as within the thoughts are projection from a greater reality, without the objects, the mountains, the planet are also projections from a great overarching reality. And this overarching reality appears to be the same, because there is only one reality. I don't know whether I'm clear in my explanation. So, in that sense, in our understanding, it is important to break the linkage that we believe to exist between consciousness and mind. Yes. to liberate consciousness from mind, to be open to the possibilities that consciousness is overarching, and that in this way, to be open that consciousness is the reality of all things. It is very difficult and far-fetched to be open to the possibility for consciousness to be the ultimate reality of all things if we don't make this, if we still believe it to be linked to mind. Then we fall into some kind of solipsism or new agey thought, like we as a mind create our own reality. Come on. You know, that solipsism, it doesn't make any sense to any reasonable person. You see what I mean? Because it's tantamount to say, only my mind is real, you are nothing. You see, you don't exist. You are just a creation of my thoughts. That doesn't make any sense. Everybody can see that such a person is completely deluded. You know that. But the moment we are open to the possibilities that consciousness is different from mind, let's put it in this way, that way, then it opens up a brand new perspective on consciousness, because then it frees. It liberates consciousness from mind and makes it possible for consciousness to be the ultimate reality of everything. So if you meant linkage in this sense, yes.
But there's nothing I can intentionally do to break that linkage, is there?
Well, the autonomy, the question is, how does the autonomy of consciousness from mind reveals itself? Well, the autonomy of a thing with regard to another, let's say the autonomy of thing A with respect to thing B reveals itself if you can have thing A without thing B. Are you following me? And so the question is, can I have the experience of consciousness without mind? The answer is yes. And we just live in a society which is not open to this possibility precisely because of the linkage you were alluding to. However, between two perceptions, there is a gap. There are gaps in our experience, and these gaps are these moments when we have the experience of consciousness without mind, and these are these moments that we refer to by saying, "I suddenly became aware that." Or I suddenly became conscious that. You see, these moments refer to a discontinuity in the train of perceptions. So, it will be the moment there is this, because there are two things happen in this. First of all, there is a discontinuity, but that's not the only thing that happens. Is that in this discontinuity between something happens. In this discontinuity, something very important happens. Our becoming aware of something. Are you following? It's not like nothing happens. Let's assume I'm daydreaming. So I'm following my daydream, right? And all of a sudden I realize, I become aware I am daydreaming. So in this moment, the daydreaming has stopped, right? In order for me to become aware that I was daydreaming, daydreaming at that moment comes to a stop. So, and then the next thought that comes, that follows my daydreaming thought, is, well, I just was daydreaming. But in between these two thoughts, something which is real happened, which is my realization that I was daydreaming. It's not like nothing has happened. You see, there is a depth to this moment. The same thing about a moment of understanding. Something happens when a moment of understanding takes place. So, in other words, these moments, although they have no duration, in which the mind is absent, are substantial. We could say that they are even more substantial, in fact, than the moments when there is just a mentation. These moments are, because they are creative, in a sense. Often they create the next mentation, in fact. There are moments of creativity. I'm saying that just to point at this experience of consciousness without mind. That it is not something unknown to us. It's something that we know. And which is rich. And which is, of course, not the usual experience in the presence of mentation. But it feels very much like home, and it feels very comfortable in these moments.
So the mentation obscures those moments.
Ignorance obscures it. Ignorance is a thought to which we are attached, and that has never stopped since we have adopted it up until the moment when we have our first glimpse of truth. Then this thought somehow dies in its source, and the source reveals itself. And then, as a result, even if a similar thought arises again out of some residual habit or inertia, it won't last, because we will always go back to this experience of peace between the thoughts. It takes only one moment, which is infinite, which is doesn't take time, which is not in time, to experience consciousness without object. And that's enough. It's like in mathematics. To prove that a proposition is wrong, it takes only one counter-example, only one, and that's it. The thing is demolished instantaneously in one single with one single counter-example, or case in which the proposition is shown to be wrong. You don't have to show that it is wrong in all cases. There's only one. And it's the same here. It takes only one occurrence, one experience of consciousness without objects to understand, to realize the freedom of consciousness from all objects. From all objects. Only one case without objects, then we realize that it is free from all objects. Okay, I'm going to go online. A question that was asked yesterday, but I didn't answer. From Anna. Do we meet with long-lost friends when we die? Or is that just nonsense? From the vantage point of consciousness, these long friends were nothing and nobody else than yourself. So you have not part company. You never parted company from them. So there is no need to meet them. Now, if you want again to project their images from your absolute freedom, of course you can do that. But these will be only images of your own creation. You have to understand that the question is asked still from the vantage point of from a mind, from a separate entity that sees other separate entities. But consciousness is whole and complete. So when it creates projection, images, people, worlds, it's out of the happiness and of the fullness of its own recognition and experience. It's not out of a sense of lack. So nothing is missing from there. Not friends, no loved ones, no. Mary asks, when the perceiver and the perceived become one, an objectless awareness, is that also in the realm of truth? Would it be the aim in a particular endeavor, such as learning to play an instrument, where the player and the instrument become one? The truth is that the perceiver and the perceived cannot become one because they are already one. They have always been one. You can only become that which you were not. You cannot become that which you already are. So what happens is that the illusion of separation and of distinction between the perceiver and the perceived drops. Dissolves. And that which remains is this pre-existing and intrinsic oneness of the perceiver and the perceived. Let me give you an analogy of this experience. If the analogy is taking the ordinary stance of identifying with the body, if I identify with the body, and if I look at my hand is me. It's not all of me, but it's me, if I identify with the body. So, in that sense, I, as a perceiving body, and my hand, as the perceived body, are one. So we know this experience of oneness with our hand when we are in ignorance, right? Meaning when we identify with the body. Now, the same thing, when we are not in ignorance, we don't identify with the body, we identify with consciousness. In this case, the analogon of the hand is whatever object we perceive. Whatever object is perceived is me, just as in the case of identification, my hand was me, if I identify with the body. If I'm identified with consciousness, which is my true identity, everything is me. It doesn't mean there is no perception, but I am trying to convey what the experience of the perceiver and the perceived being one feels like. It feels as natural as you looking at your hand. When you look at your hand, you don't have to think, my hand is me. You know, it's a kind of, it's taken for granted. You look at your hand, there is no division, no separation. That's me. There is this intimacy with your hand which pre-exists any thought that you can have about it. So when you don't identify with a localized body but with consciousness, you can have the same intimacy with whatever is perceived as you had with your hand in ignorance. The world becomes your true body in that sense. That would be the description of the experience. And it is a very natural experience. It is not something out of the ordinary like you can get by smoking a big joint. It's not like that. It's extremely natural. Oops, I've not been recording up until now. Christian says, the clarity of being consciousness knowingly and the peace that comes with it is often overshadowed by the daily list of duties which seems to get longer with every year. It sometimes feels that I even have to plan and save the time to meditate or do yoga. But it feels like pressure and duty, what is actually supposed to be effortless. then I'd rather cancel it because life is already enough full of obligations and responsibilities. So the fact is that I always seem to be caught up in a hurry, and even the beautiful things like the wish to call my friends ends up on my inner virtual to-do list. But I hate to be in a hurry because to me, it is the opposite of being free and celebrating life. On the other hand, the vision of life being effortless, the effortlessness in every action, is something that I kept in my heart like a golden secret from you. It often helps me in interaction with people, but how can I make it evolve in every action and aspect of my life? There are three kinds of peace, or of silence, if you will. There is physical peace or silence when the body, for instance, is at rest. But when the body is at rest, the thoughts may be racing. And then there is the peace of mind, when the thoughts are not racing, when the mind is very quiet and is not active. This peace of the mind can be artificially created by some practice. But then there is the peace that passeth the mind, which is the peace of consciousness. And that's the one we are talking about here. And this peace that passeth the mind is not affected by the presence or the absence of activities, either of the body or of the mind. However, the activities of the body and of the mind are affected by that peace, gradually, incrementally. So, the more we abide in that peace, the more the activities of the mind and of the body will lose their erratic and hectic quality. The mind and the body can still be racing, but there will be a spontaneity to it. There will be a freedom, there will be a joy to it. Now, and that will happen as a result of your love for the truth. Remember that although even I sometimes recommend to set aside some time to meditate, the meditations that are the most efficient are the ones that arise spontaneously, thinking about the truth, during moments of availability when we are invited. And they lead to moments of understanding. And these moments of understanding are, in fact, moments when we have access to the peace that is beyond the mind. I would remind you of one thing, is that we really can think only of one thing at a time. And if we keep that in mind, that will create some order in the way we proceed. it is a waste of energy to jump from one item of thought to another ceaselessly. Once we understand that we have to deal with issues sequentially, it already creates a lot of peace, practically speaking. The next things to do is to create your priority. As you say, your to-do list. Create a list of priorities. And you'll see that at some point, meditation and thinking about the truth will climb rather high in your list of priorities. So that then you'll see that there are moments when the option is, do I do this, or do I save this time to think about the truth, or do I do this because I want to earn more money, to buy more plastic stuff, or do useless stuff, and you see that gradually the truth will climb towards the top of the list and then will stay up there. But it has to happen effortlessly and naturally. The second thing that happens is that this separation between meditation and life will also disappear. You were alluding to your responsibilities and towards your loved ones, for instance. And these responsibilities are there, but there is no conflict of interest between taking care of your loved ones and seeking the truth. They are your yoga exercises. They are part of it. And they are part of the path. Now, what is going to happen also is that you are going to be a little more mindful about taking on new responsibilities that you don't have to take on. For instance, if you have already 3 children, what's the point of having a 4th child? Or if you have 0 children, if you are in love with truth, what's the point of having 1 more child? Where is your priority there? You see, where is your priority? You see, so in doing so, in being very careful at each turn on the path, where your priority is, having more children, having more money, having more relationships, going more often to the restaurants, having more stupid, useless conversations, meeting more people who couldn't care less about the truth and about you, etc. You see that you, first of all, your karma that you have accumulated due to your past actions, the responsibilities you have taken in the past, this karma will gradually leave you free. The children you have had will grow up, and they will go to college, and then they will get a job, and then they will create a lot of freedom, etc. So some people will leave you. You will have breakups, you have things like that. People will die in your life. So the responsibilities will gradually give you more freedom in a natural way. But remember that the real effortlessness is in the midst of the action, in the midst of the thinking, in the midst of the perceiving already. So seek it at every moment and you will find it always. It's always there. Even if you are sitting behind your desk or dealing with an employee or your boss or a customer or whatever, at every moment the peace is there. Andrew says, when producing music, I often get so absorbed in the process that I lose all awareness of myself and of time. Should I attempt to be aware in this situation or just go with the flow? When you are enjoying life, when you're having a good time, just go with the flow. I don't understand too well what you mean by producing music, whether it's composing or whether it's just playing. But anyway, in both cases, it's very good to lose awareness of yourself and your time and of time when you play. Don't lose the beat, though. Lose your sense of time, but not the tempo. But you're too busy focusing on the sound, on the production, or on the inner inspiration, on the message, on the feeling the music within you, to be aware of yourself and of time. So just go with the musical flow, yes. Thomas, yesterday you said something about separate self not having control over thought. Could you please talk about it a bit more? This part of the video was missing. Also, you said something about withdrawing interest from objects being the same as death. Could you talk a bit more about it? Is my interest in myself the same? Well, let's take one question at a time. Separate self not having control over thought. What I said is simply this: try to control your thoughts. Try to have only loving thoughts, or only beautiful thoughts, or only happy thoughts. You see, it's not possible. You cannot assign to yourself the thoughts you are going to have. So that you're, in the way, for instance, we can say, I can plan. I'm going to take a trip to the Bay Area. And I plan, I'm going to take the car, I'm going to go to Ontario Airport, then I'm going to fly to San Jose and whatever. And so, in that sense, we believe we are in control of events. We can plan, we can choose. But can we do the same with thoughts? Can we say, just as I say, okay, I'm going to choose to go to Ontario Airport, and from there I take an airplane ticket to San Jose. Can we say, okay, I'm going to choose to have a very happy thought about love, and then a very beautiful thought about God? No, we cannot plan it that way, you see. We don't have the freedom of our thoughts. So we don't control our thoughts the way it seems to us that we control events in our life, like a trip. However, if we think how we control the events in our life, our trip. We control them through our thoughts. The decisions we make appear as thoughts. And since we don't control our thoughts, it turns out that we don't really control the events in our life. It just looks that way, but as a separate person, we don't control our thoughts. That which controls our thoughts and that which controls the weather is the same controller. Our thoughts are not different from the weather. That's that which I was talking about in this part of the video that was missing. Also, you said something about, I'm reading his question, withdrawing interest from all objects being the same as death. I don't remember what you are alluding to, so I have to assume here, or to explain. There is a natural withdrawal of interest from objects that takes place when we become interested in our true nature, because our true nature is not an object. So there is a natural transfer of interest from the objects that in ignorance were assumed to be the source of happiness to the present, the consciousness, which has been discovered to be the place of happiness. And eventually, there will be, again, a renewed interest from the objects of the world, for the world, if you will, but then without any tension, without any real need. The objects are just like toys. They are icing on the cake. They are not really mandatory, but they are just toys or instruments to celebrate. So this withdrawing of interest from all objects is not at all the same as death. It is more, in fact, like being born to true life. So I don't see what you are alluding to when you say that I mentioned that withdrawing interest from all objects was the same as death. Someone who lacks enthusiasm, yes, is a deaf person. But enthusiasm is not necessarily directed towards objects. In fact, in its pure experience, enthusiasm is interest for the self. Which leads to the next question. Is my interest in myself the same? What we are is love. Love is interest. And what we are, this love, in fact, is directed towards itself. What we are is love loving itself. So in that sense, your interest, your love, and yourself are the same. You are the love that loves itself. Next question. How does being with my non-objective interest lead to elimination of separation? Your non-objective interest is interest directed towards consciousness, towards that which is hearing these words right this moment. We, in ignorance, we believe that this consciousness is itself an object, or that it is dependent on some objects. We usually believe that consciousness is dependent upon the body. We usually believe in our culture that consciousness is dependent upon the brain, that it is a brain, an emerging property of the brain. So we believe that consciousness is brain-based, the brain itself being body-based, and the body, of course, being separate from the rest of the world. So therefore, if I consciousness, I am dependent upon this brain, dependent itself upon this body, I consciousness am as separate or even more separate from the rest of the world as or than this brain body. So that's in ignorance. If I believe consciousness to be dependent upon the body, there is separateness. What happens with my interest, what you call my non-objective interest, which is my interest directed upon or towards the experience of consciousness as an experience, I'm going to discover that in my own experience there are no facts that substantiate this dependency of consciousness from an object, from a brain, from a mind, from a thought, from a body. As a result of this investigation, I will be open to the possibility that consciousness, instead of being separate, is universal. And the moment I'm open to this possibility that it is universal, meaning non-localized in time or in space, but that it is rather the reality out of which this universe, as well as this mind and all the minds, arise, and that creates them. As a result of this investigation and my discovery that there is no evidence that consciousness is not free from the body, I will begin to conduct experiments in my life to check out the alternate possibility. And the more I conduct these experiments, the more it will turn out that I, as consciousness, am not separate. And that's how the interest for non-objective consciousness leads to the dissolution of the separation. Mr. or Mrs. Richards, when you identify with consciousness and have the same intimacy with whatever is perceived as I do with my own hand in ignorance, how do I then experience suffering, anger, and hatred in the world. If you are free from your own suffering, from your own anger, and from your own hatred, and when you are actually in the presence of suffering, anger, and hatred, not intellectually, and that's a huge difference, not intellectually, but actually in the life experience, in your daily life of suffering, anger, and hatred, you will experience it from within. And that in this way, there will be true compassion, true sharing of the experience. Out of this sharing, the sharing in itself will bring about some relief and some understanding around you. But also in context, you may do things, you may say things that will also contribute to this expansion of understanding. And remember, understanding is love. And love and understanding, love and intelligence are the solution. But always in context. Never in an ideological fashion. Ideologies are dead. They are dead wood. They are useless, dead wood. Attila. Lately I had some nice conversations with friends where somehow happiness came back as a recurring topic. These friends are open-minded, but not into non-duality, and I am also not into converting them. Good for you. My challenge here is that I realized that I lack a good and clear definition of happiness. I kind of got stuck around the negative approach. Like, happiness is there where nothing is missing. But it feels like I could really use a better one and avoid the impression of a wooden language. Please help. Well, often when we have a negative experience, it teaches us something. For instance, the fact that you realize that you lack a good and clear definition of happiness, perhaps that teaches you that happiness cannot be defined. And why is that? Because happiness is not an object. Only an object can be defined, because only an object has shape, has defining properties, defining characteristics. An object can be compared to another object. An object belongs to the realm of duality. So in fact, the more you try to find a good and clear definition of happiness, and the more this good and clear definition eludes you, the more it teaches you that as an experience, happiness is not an objective experience. And if happiness is not an objective experience, but if it is still an experience, the only logical remaining possibility is that it is a noumenal or subjective experience. In other words, that happiness is simply the only noumenal experience there is, which is consciousness experiencing itself. So we all know happiness because we all have had moments of happiness that we may not have recognized on the spot. But in hindsight, somehow we say, okay, yes, I was happy. There was this perfume then, there was. But the perfume itself may refer to a state of the body, a state of elation in the body, or a state of clarity or enthusiasm or whatever, agitation, joy in the mind. But these were simply byproduct of an experience which is prior to that, prior to the mind and to the body. So, the negative approach, you say, I like a good and clear definition of happiness. I kind of got stuck around the negative approach. The negative approach leads to the conclusion that happiness must be the experience of pure subjectivity. So, and this experience of pure subjectivity leads to peace because the experience of pure subjectivity reveals the total independence of subject, of consciousness, from all phenomena. So, consciousness is not affected by the phenomena. And therefore it is free from all the phenomena. And this freedom from all phenomena, that nothing can affect consciousness, brings about peace. And peace, which is nothing is missing, the experience you are alluding to, real peace, is an experience in which nothing is missing. And this peace where nothing is missing, is in fact the prerequisite for joy. So happiness is a mix of peace and joy, an alternance, from peace to joy, from joy to peace. It is the alternance from the unmanifested, in fact, to the manifested. In the eyes of the jnani, this alternance from the manifested from the unmanifested to the manifested is the alternance from peace to joy and back from joy to peace. But they are all the same perfume. What is important, Attila, is not what you tell to your friends. What is important is for you to get established in this peace and happiness. And then somehow it will share itself with your friends. Andrew says, several years ago, I met a certain non-duality teacher in Europe. His take is that nothing matters and everything is pointless. But he also seems very happy and authentic, so I believe him. The side effects of his nothing matters message appears to have been negative to me. I want to do various things, but then the thought, oh, this doesn't even matter. I might as well just sit around until I die appears. Then all motivation and energy leaves me. I haven't been able to undo this. Can you help? This teacher is right. Ultimately, nothing matters and everything is pointless. But is that your experience? You see, because we cannot live our life from the experience of others, no matter how enlightened they may or may not be. We have to live our life from our own experience. So if it is true for me that nothing matters and that everything is pointless, then that's fine. For instance, if your wife comes to you and tells you, you know, I took a lover because you're not that great in bed. and nothing matters to you, that's fine. If all of a sudden, your banker who was giving you a 12% interest on your money, and you have asked for full to get all your money back from his CD, says, well, you know what? Wait a few months because right now I don't have the cash to give you. And if it doesn't matter to you, that's great. But on the other hand, if at that moment you feel some disappointment, then you cannot apply to yourself the motto that nothing matters and everything is pointless. You see? So it is not, what is important is for you to see whether you are there or not. Is it true or is it just an intellectual position that nothing matters? And because then, my take is this. When it is really true for you that nothing matters and that everything is pointless, you will act in the world as if everything mattered and as if everything had meaning, because everything will have some meaning, but the meaning of it won't be in the world. So, this situation of nihilism, that nothing matters and everything is pointless, cannot really be applied in your real life. I'm not sure I am clear. You see, if you feel this pointlessness and this almost depressive situation where you have lost all enthusiasm to do things in the world, chances are you're not yet at that stage where nothing matters to you. Because if truly nothing matters to you, it means that you have found the only thing that matters. And once the only thing that matters has found you, you find it everywhere, in everything you do. Ashim. When one awakens, where does the desire to improve one's life arise from, such as health, relationships, and work? Or does one become content with where they are? Or, as some other Advaita teachers have mentioned, do the improvements happen naturally without us trying so hard? The desire that awakens with the revelation of our true nature is the desire to realign the way we live with truth, love, and beauty. And as a result, we revisit all aspects of our life. Ultimately, there is no anxiety added to that, you see. It's more like a game. We do our best to realign our life. For instance, if the job, what we do professionally, is not that much in line with what we have discovered, we try to change jobs. And perhaps 2 years later, we try to change jobs again. Or we try to move from one house to another house for the sake of beauty. And sometimes there are changes in our relationships too. That's also always for the best. So there is nothing to worry about. It happens also that one becomes content with the way things are. In fact, the desire to change and the fact to be content with the way things are not as mutually exclusive as they seem to be. I can be very happy with my situation and still have the desire to drive or to steer this situation into some direction in the future towards love, truth, and beauty. So all of that is true. Instantaneously, we are very happy with the way things are. Perhaps I have not been clear enough in my explanation. Instantaneously, with the revelation of our true nature, we are happy with the way things are. We are happy with the total situation as it presents itself, as it is presenting itself at that moment. But the total situation, as it is presenting itself at that moment, is not solely the situation outside in the world. There is also the situation inside within us. We are totally at peace with the totality of the situation. But the situation inside may tell us, this boss you have at work who is abusing you, it is not loving for you to stay in this situation, nor is it loving for him. It is a kind of S&M relationship you have with this guy. That's not healthy. So this small, still voice within is part of the totality of the situation, which is perfect as it is, you see? So you are accepting the situation outside, but also inside. And it is this still small voice inside which is telling you, which is going to create, if you will, the dynamism that is going to lead to a change in the situation. While you are now and later perfectly happy with the total situation as it is. You see the beauty, you see the serendipity of it. But that doesn't prevent you from taking steps to change it. The still small voice may tell you, this very ugly, huge, bulky table you have inherited from grandma, right? Who live in the farm. And you are now in New York in this small one-bedroom apartment. And you have this fireplace. Mary. No. Thomas. It was to the question, what happens to consciousness after the death of the body, that you answer that the death is the same as withdrawal of attention from objects. Just as I don't have any control over thought, I also have no control over my interest objectively, because I am already interested without my knowledge. So it seems that I can only withdraw my interest from all objects in order to follow my interest. How do I see that I and my interest are the same? When I say, for instance, when I talk about your interest, you are taking it personally. You are assuming that I am speaking of your interest as a person. But when I speak to you, I'm not speaking to a person. You see? So, whereas when I say that we don't have control over our thoughts, I am always careful to specify that as a separate individual, we have no control over our thoughts. And therefore, we have no control over our interest as a separate individual. I never said that as that which we are, as consciousness, we have no control over our thoughts or over our interest. You see? So that's where the confusion arises, and this apparent catch-22 that arises when I say, on the one hand, that we have no control over our thoughts as separate individual. And when I say, for instance, things such as follow your enthusiasm. If I say follow your enthusiasm, you say, wait a minute. How can you tell me to follow my enthusiasm if on the other hand you are telling me that I have no control over my interest, over my enthusiasm? You are not consistent. It's just that you are missing the little small print that goes with my statement that you don't have control over your thoughts. You don't have a control over your thoughts as a separate entity. But as a separate entity, you are also devoid of consciousness. In fact, as a separate entity, you are non-existent. So, as I speak to you, as I say things such as follow your enthusiasm, I'm not speaking to a separate entity who has no consciousness and who cannot understand me. I am speaking to that part of you which understands, which perceives, and who has freedom, and who can make the decision to follow its enthusiasm. That's a part of you to whom I'm speaking. So this part of you knows itself. That which understands knows that it is conscious. And that which understands knows, and that which perceives also loves itself. Consciousness loves itself. And which implies that it has an inherent interest and enthusiasm for itself, which is already there, and which I am only reminding you. Follow this interest. It is already there. I am not creating it. I'm just mentioning it to you. Don't worry about who is it who is becoming interested in satsang, in the truth, who is asking questions. The answer will come at the end of the investigation. You don't need the answer in the beginning, because that would be only a postponement of the investigation. Do the investigation without knowing who the investigator is. For the knowledge of the investigator comes only at the end of the investigation. But the investigator is already here in the beginning. We have exhausted the questions here. Any remaining questions among our group? No. Thank you.